Welcome to the next episode of Passion for Property with Manni Chopra. And my next guest is moreover a landlord's friend, confidant and defender, in simple English, but he's actually the co-founder of Landlord Licensing and Defence, none other than Desmond Taylor. Welcome, Des.
Hi, welcome.
So I'm super excited because landlords are in big trouble right now. And I believe this war on landlords had started back, I'd say, in 2016 with Section 24, as the way I look at it from my 14 years in property. And that was where I think it all went downhill from. So Desmond, firstly, tell us who you are, why should we be listening to you, and how can you be our friend? Because landlords certainly need a lot of friends right now.
Great. Well, legislation is changing, has been changing for a long time. We saw the biggest change back in 1988 when we got the assured short-hold tenancy, which they now wish to remove. And we saw changes in 2015 when they decided that we'd have the Section 24 taxation issue. And then in 2016, we had something called the Housing and Planning Act 2016. And what that did was take the authorities' ability to prosecute you and turn that into the ability to fine you. So, and there wasn't really a war at the time. It was councils do a lot of work to prosecute landlords for doing bad things like not licensing their property, not complying with improvement notices, not complying with planning enforcement notices. But they had to prosecute them in the magistrates' court, of which they didn't get the proceeds. They might get their costs. So there was no benefit. There was no enforcement. So what changed was a year later, they were able to enforce, they were able to set fines in a policy. And once they set those fines, what they would be able to then do was to actually keep the money from those fines 100%. So they set the policy to cover their costs, to cover all the parts and bits and pieces. And then we saw something called civil financial penalties. And in addition to that, in England, we don't have the law of double jeopardy. So you can be tried twice in housing. So they brought in rent repayment orders as well. So as long as the tenant could prove you didn't have a license, or you hadn't complied with an improvement notice or prohibition order, or hadn't complied with a planning enforcement notice, they could reply to the rent tribunal panel, as it used to be called, and they would be able to apply for a rent repayment order and up to a year's rent. So that was the beginning, but it didn't really change until 2018, when you will remember the law changed with HMOs, and you didn't need the requirement for a HMO to have 3 floors in order to be licensed. And that was when they all had to rewrite and republish and do things. And we saw the advent of artificial intelligence software for licensing. And that was how the war started. And it has gone on. And to date, last year, there were 6,200 financial penalties issued across the UK against landlords and letting agents. And I have dealt with, in the last 7 to 8 years, over 2,500 cases for landlords defending them.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah.
So let's sort of try and unravel some of this information. Now, you talked about rent repayment orders. What are the different scenarios that landlords can be asked to refund the rent? Firstly, is it all the rent? Is it part of the rent? How does this whole thing work?
Okay. So what happened in the legislation in 2004, a rent repayment order could only be awarded if they'd been a landlord had been prosecuted. That changed in 2017 because now you didn't need to have a prosecution, you just needed to be able to prove it at a criminal level. So that's in those infamous words, beyond reasonable doubt.
Prosecution was for housing offences, or could be anything else?
So those housing offences, the prosecution, let's get the difference here. Prosecution means going to the magistrates' court for a summary conviction. Enforcement with a civil penalty or rent repayment order is an alternative to prosecution. So you don't get prosecuted.
As in, you don't go to jail.
You don't get a fine through the court. Oh. Okay. So when we look at what are the things that you can do wrong, if a house needs to be licensed with a selective license or HMO license and you don't have one, that is one offence. Another offence is committing an offence under the Protection from Eviction Act 1977, and that is about illegal eviction or harassment. And that's quite hard to prove, but there have been some that have been done. The other main ones are not complying with a planning enforcement notice, not complying with an improvement notice, not complying with a prohibition order. Those are the main ones that you see, and there are only a few others that can be done, which we don't see any enforcement on.
Minefield.
It's not
I can barely
particularly.
remember some of the things you've just told me. I mean, for landlords to take on this board, to take on this on board is minefield, right? But let's put it in a nutshell. Landlords need to comply with the law, right? That I'm not denying that. But I think what's happened over a period of time is those compliance rules and regulations have just built up over a period of time. And obviously the cost of it is also building up. Uh, so, what do we do? Because, we are in a bit of a pickle, I'd say, landlords, and to put it in a very simple and mild way. Um, where do we find out firstly? So let's start with some licensing rules. So you've got HMO licensing, which if you go and look it up for your council, you'll see what the licensing standards are, and you can make sure your HMO property fulfills all those requirements. Then you have additional and selective, and I believe in December 2024, councils no longer have to go to central government to do a consultation if they want to introduce selective or additional licensing, which has made it very easy for them now.
Yes, it's made it very easy. So let's take it's mandatory HMO licensing applies across all the boroughs and on all the councils in the country.
Yeah.
And that is for a house where there are 5 occupants, of which at least 2 are unrelated.
Yeah.
That's simple.
Yeah.
So just to be clear, that's for a mandatory license. But what creates a HMO, which complicates it, is when a property has 3 occupants from 2 households.
Yeah.
Now, 2 households could be a couple and a friend.
Yes.
So now you've got a HMO, but it may not need to be licensed unless that local authority insists at that level they have additional HMO licensing. So additional HMO licensing could be introduced for 3 or 4 occupants from 2 households, and that's where additional licensing comes in. And in a lot of the London boroughs, that has occurred. And it's also another part that people get very confused is something called Article 4, which is about planning.
Okay, so let's just rewind first. So additional licensing is purely for 2 or more households, 3 people, but from 2 or more households, but that's only related to HMOs?
Only in HMOs where additional licensing has been introduced.
So that's additional licensing.
Yeah.
Then you have selective licensing.
Selective licensing is also where a selective area in a council has been chosen to have a licensing scheme, and that could be it's generally done by voting wards. So if we were to consider Leeds City Council, they have Beeston and Hare Hills, and those 2 areas have selective licensing. Now that has expired, and they're going through a consultation to have more wards added, and they want to include the 2 wards that they had before. The interesting thing is one of the reasons for selective licensing is to drive out antisocial behaviour. It's to improve the standards of housing. It's to have more things working properly within the area. Well, that's failed in that area. And it fails all the time, yet they go forward again and say, we're going to have a consultation. We're going to see that nobody wants it, not the tenants, because it means rent rises. The landlords don't want it because it's more costs, which again means rent rises. But they push forward with these things anyway. But it's for buy-to-let properties, which are not HMOs.
Right.
Okay. Now, if you've got a HMO that's a small HMO, so 3 or 4 occupants.
Mini-mos, I think you call them.
Mini-mos, and it's in a selective licensing area, it may well need to be licensed because they don't have an additional licensing scheme. Oh, it gets very confusing. Yes, London Borough of Barking and Dagenham has a selective licensing scheme. It has the mandatory licensing scheme. But if you've got a HMO and it's got 3 or 4 occupants, it doesn't need a HMO license at all. And their selective licensing doesn't cover that additional HMO. So it gets really, really confusing. So how does the council enforce against you? The bit that nobody thinks about is called the HMO management regulations. And there are 7 of those for the landlord to comply with and 1 for the tenant to comply with. So it gets even more confusing.
7 for landlords and 1.
Yes. Would you like to know what those are?
Yes, please.
Okay. So Regulation 3 is displaying a notice of who is the manager of the property. Regulation 4 is about safety, includes fire safety. So the jurisdiction of fire safety comes under HMO regulations and the local council, not the fire brigade.
So if you don't put these notices up, you
don't put the notice and you don't comply with safety like protected fire escape routes and proper fire doors and fire alarms, it's an offence. Regulation 5 is about water and drainage. Regulation 6 is about electricity and gas supply. Regulation 7 is about the maintenance, management and design of the Common Parts Regulation 8 is about the individual rooms, and Regulation 9 is about the waste.
So all this presumably would have been considered when you put the HMO license in. But like you said, some boroughs don't have HMO mandatory licensing.
But they can still enforce against you under what's something called strict liability. Now, people don't really understand what strict liability means. What strict liability means in everyday terms is you didn't need to think about committing the offence, nor did you need to know the offence was being committed. So really, in a HMO, so you've got a couple, you've got a 2-bedroom flat, you rent the flat to a couple, and a friend moves down from another part of the country, moves in unbeknownst to you, and you don't know anything about it, but the first person who does is the council. You have committed an offence that you didn't know about, and for which you can be enforced against with a fine, and, would you believe it, a rent repayment order.
And these rent repayment orders, how long back? How did you pay 1 month's rent, 2 months' rent?
Right, so it's up to 12 months is the maximum currently. And that 12 months rent is determined by the tribunal, and it can be reduced by a certain amount. Back in 2021, the average settlement or judgment determination by the tribunal was 97.9% of the amount applied for HMO.
They got it back.
97.9%. That has been addressed. It has gone down to between 75 and 80 most of the time for HMO. It's a little bit lower for selective licensing.
Of the annual rent.
Of the rent that they paid. Yeah, the amount they're claiming. But they have a year to claim from the time the offence stops being committed or the tenancy is ended. But that is all going to be changing under the Renters' Rights Bill because there's been a lot of campaigning by a certain organisation. So they want it to be against any landlord in the chain and up to 2 years' rent collectively.
So is that the new rule?
That's the suggested new rule that will come into the Renters'
They'll ask for up to 2 years' rent.
Yeah.
Why would anyone want to be a landlord?
Oh, because it's still one of the best ways to invest. It's still one of the best ways to do things. Unfortunately, if you don't want to do it in the way that it needs to be done and you don't want to feel comfortable about putting your rents up because your costs have gone up, then it maybe isn't for you. But you have to think like the directors of Tesco's and Sainsbury who say our costs for the goods that are coming in has gone up. The weather has changed this, that's changed, regulations changed. Our costs are going up. Petrol's gone up. Transportation's gone up. There's more legislation.
Bills.
So the price of the goods that you pay for in the supermarket goes up. Well, rent, that's going to be restricted to once a year. It currently is already restricted, but more clearly under the Renters' Rights Act. And that means that we have to judge our business, work out what are our costs going to be, what are our potential future costs, which if we've been a landlord for a while, we can probably work out historically what's going to happen in the future. And then we have to make sure we do our rent increases every year to cover that.
Yeah.
And the tenants need to understand that. And the new process under the Renters' Rights Act will be that if they want to contest it, they go to tribunal. Currently, it's a little bit less informal, but they're not changing the law. They're just enhancing the law. The law already exists for rent increases and rent repayment orders, and all of these things exist. The Renters' Rights Bill, which everybody is campaigning about, is essentially a collective and bringing together of multiple legislation, and the enforcement is going to be far easier for the council to do rather than having to go to the court. And they've been testing that for 8 years.
So in your view, this Renters' Rights Bill, do you think it's going to help tenants a lot, do you think? Or do you think there are going to be lots of unscrupulous tenants coming out there and trying it out, not paying the rents and seeing how far they can go and, trying to live free, basically?
I think that people are already doing that. I think they've been trying that for a long time. The big thing is that Section 21 is going to be going. Most people are using Section 21 because we don't want to have to go through the burden of proof that we do under a Section 8. It's simple, it's easy. So if you've been using those, and many people have, there are lots of others who haven't, you're not going to be able to do that in the future. But the reality of Section 21 is it's not there to benefit, the abolition isn't there to benefit the tenants, and it's not there to benefit the landlords. It's there to benefit the council.
Okay.
It's only there to benefit the council.
Explain.
Who benefits from it is very simple. Section 21 goes away. I can't now evict a tenant at will. Well, I say at will, but we have to go to the...
Anywhere,
we
right?
can't get them without reason.
Yeah.
So So now they can't. So the only reason they can be evicted now is for a reason under Section 8. I'm either selling the property, I'm refurbishing the property, they're in breach of contract, serious breach of
Family
contract,
moving, yeah.
antisocial behaviour, or they're in rent arrears.
Yeah.
Now, if they're antisocial behaviour or rent arrears, then they're intentionally homeless. So the court will make them homeless. Now, if you're currently under Section 21, if you're made homeless unintentionally, i.e. your landlord serves you notice, you go and queue at the council offices, metaphorically, and you say, house me. And they say, don't leave until the bailiffs come. That's illegal as well, but it doesn't matter if you're a council. You can break the law as much as you like. Nobody's going to enforce against you. That is reality. Look at our prime ministers for the last 3 or 4. Okay. But the reality is nothing's going to happen to the council. They can act unlawfully all the time. Nobody's going to be culpable. But they go there and they say, wait till the bailiffs come. And then you don't ever get your money, and they eventually go and they get their credit record destroyed and all the other things that happen. Well, at that time, the council has the liability to house them. But if they're at fault, they have no liability. So if you've made yourself intentionally homeless because you're antisocial, you don't pay your rent, and the council can't help you, where are you going to go? There's only one place you can go, possibly friends, sofas, or the street. So how do we deal with that problem that's going to arise, that we're going to be making people forced to be criminals on the streets? We repeal the Vagrancy Act.
Yeah.
It's all coming together now. It's all being connected. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I have.
So you mean you're talking about the decriminalizing
of living on the streets?
Living on the streets, yeah.
Or living in parks.
Yeah.
So the tents that we probably see in Calais.
Yeah. Well, they're in Park Lane, apparently.
They are in Park Lane, but we'll start seeing that here because it won't be a crime to be a vagrant.
Yeah.
Now, the law goes back. If you go study history and study finance and study how the town councils were formed and their duties, that's where the Vagrancy Act came in. And they have a duty to deal with that. They won't have a duty anymore.
Because, they don't have the facilities, they don't have the houses, they don't have the means to house them.
Yeah. So everything that we think is about landlords and tenants and benefits to one and disadvantages to the other, it's actually the biggest beneficiaries are going to be central government and the local housing authorities.
So not only will the local councils become super rich by finding and enforcing planning enforcements and other fines and what have you, they also now have no duty of care for the tenants who've either been socially evicted because of antisocial behavior or not paying rent, and they can just live on the streets. So where are we coming to? I mean, where is this going to, and where is this leading to?
So what will the council will do? Remember, they do like to manipulate numbers. So if we can change some things, and we're improving our housing. Now, I made an article recently which says if we can't have the money, you can't have the money, and that was about, remember HMO room banding?
Yes.
Where the councils were telling about all the properties that had
Well, I had one of my HMOs banded for 10 years almost.
But let's say you're in a house and we got one council tax, and that one council tax brings you, so we'll say £2,400 a year, so £200 a month. Okay. And what you do is you get the valuation office to revalue it as 5 HMO rooms on a room banding. And now they're in band A, and that just happens to be £1,200 a year.
No, I know, because exactly.
But now we've got 6,000 in comparison to 2,400. So the council's got that money until the Finance Act was changed in the 1st December 2023.
Yeah.
And that was really important. But now they can't going to get all that money, and they've had to reverse it.
Yes.
So how do we go about it now? Well, we're going to do this. We're going to get our numbers. We're going to get our money one way or the other. So you're not able to do the things that you want to do. So what they're doing now is they're saying, we are putting in something called amenity standards. And they're saying those rooms in your HMO, although they only need to be 6.51, we think they should be 7, 8, 9 or 10 square meters for a single person. And we're not going to license that room for you anymore.
Oh, when is that coming in?
That's in the West Midlands at the moment. There are 6 or 7 councils that have brought in amenity standards, and
Which are
about the size of HMO rooms.
But it's above the national amenity
Yeah,
standards.
the national amenity standards for a room of a single person is 6.15 square meters. The other for a double room is
6.52, 5.1 and 10.
And 10.22. So let me give you some history for this, because there are a lot of people who'll be listening who are of a generation who grew up in the imperial system, and as I did. And so it's 70 square feet or 110 square feet. And 70 square feet becomes 6.51 or 6.52 as they
Yeah.
it used to be calculated before the 1st of October 2018 when it became law. And they're saying, no, we want, because we believe they need more circulation space, we want 10 square meters or etc. So in Wolverhampton, for a single room, they want 10 square meters, even though you don't have any cooking or any other facilities in there. I've just been through a case with a council in the West Midlands over this exact matter. It went to tribunal for public interest reasons. It didn't get determined by the tribunal, and an agreement was reached of how to solve it. But this has been happening in London for a very long time. All the council needs to do is introduce amenity standards, say they stand as their amenity standards, and that those are what they want. And we've won a number of cases especially in Lincoln, where there's a very large landlord there, where he created ensuite rooms with cooking facilities, and they wanted 14 square meters as the minimum standards, their amenity standards. We were able to prove that it was designed properly. It was good as it should be and designed as it
Ventilation,
did. Everything was perfect. I mean,
fire
this
strategies.
was like higher standard than probably most people's homes. They had constant occupation, so nobody was complaining. And I think it was 12.1 square meters. It might have been 11.9 square meters. The tribunal passed it at. So we have case history of winning these things, but now it's becoming a very big problem, and the councils are forcing people to appeal to the tribunal. And unfortunately, the tribunal members generally are people, they're RIC surveyors, or they are people who work in a council somewhere else, and they're a judge who's generally a barrister or a solicitor of great experience. But remember, they're part of the judiciary.gov.uk. They have a .gov.uk domain, the same as the local council. So I don't know about you or me, but I know they're on the same side because it says .gov.uk.
Yeah,
they've got to be. So it's not really a fair system, and landlords generally are not being selected to go on the panel. If we want to change this, landlords need to be pushing forward and saying, I want to be on the panel for the tribunal, so I can give the judge and the other people there a fair view. Because at the moment, essentially, we are being denied our rights from nearly over 1,200 years ago, where it says in the Magna Carta, not far from here, Runnymede, it tells us that we have a right to be tried by our peers.
Yes.
And we're not given that option. If I have a speeding fine, I have an option to go to court and have a summary, have summary judgment. And I can appeal my case. But with the systems we have today, those rights have been removed completely to be tried by our peers.
A lot of people say this is to do with the World Economic Forum, and it's to do with the fact that the Prime Minister has bought into this whole thing that no one's going to own anything or control anything. I mean, is that something you've heard about? Or
I've heard the rumours. Whether it's right, wrong, or whatever, I couldn't really comment. But what I would say is, many years ago, I made a claim that all of this enforcement is eventually going to be a land grab. Now, is it a land grab by the state or by anybody else? I'm not sure. What it appears to be is, if we enforce enough, then eventually you'll quit. And if you think about it, if you quit and you need to sell because you've been enforced against, currently the legislation doesn't allow them to take your house or to secure a charge over your house, but I'm sure they'll change that. But the councils don't have properties. They want properties to house people. And if we can keep enforcing against people, and we can change the rules of how, when you serve notice on people, that the property can't be re-let if you don't manage to sell it, and you can't do that for 12 months and it's an empty house. And who's looking for empty houses? Oh, the council. Or they might come and ask you for them and say, we demand under empty housing legislation that we have that house. So there are things here that the conspiracy theorist or the World Economic Forum supporter or opposer, should I say, is going to look at it and say, Manni, they are just trying to take everything from us. And if they can't get it by surrender, they'll take it through legislation. Now, I didn't drive here today at anything over the speed limit. Now, I'm sorry to admit to all of those of you who think I'm a wonderful person and I'm really compliant with the law and all those things. I have broken the speed limit probably more times than anybody else. And I can say that outside the statute of limitations. So, no, Mr. Policeman, you can't get me. You can't do me. But I've been done at ridiculous speeds. So when I look back now as an older person, I'm not ashamed. It was fun at the time. but I really should have been driving at those speeds on a race course, yeah, on a racetrack, not on a road or an empty motorway. I look back and go, I now drive within the regulations. I now drive properly. I do as I'm supposed to. And that's what's got to happen for landlords. The way we did things in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s are over. It all changed in the teens of the years. And I think I should tell everybody so that people know I did actually get fined for not having a license.
Where was the license?
The license was in the London Borough of Kingston. I was building a portfolio of properties. I had a staff who were selecting properties, and I had no idea the property had 3 stories. And it didn't have 5 occupants either. At the time, they had 3 people had moved into the property, and it had 3 stories. And they had one of those additional licensing schemes we talked about. And they and through the process, we were told we needed to apply for a license. Now I know how that happened because the agent we got the house from dobbed us in, told on us. So I don't know how they knew. I think they were because they were putting the tenants in. They knew the third tenant, and I think they were protecting themselves more than anything. So we dealt with it, and I got a fine. Now that was in 2015. And that fine was £342. Because under the legislation at that time, they could only recover their costs of enforcing the fine. So it's some administration. Under the policies under the Housing Planning Act 2016, the civil penalty fine, that fine for an additional licensing offence in Kingston, they don't have additional licensing anymore, by the way, but that offence today would be suggested at between, as I had a large portfolio at the time, that fine would have been between £15,000 and £25,000.
Wow.
That would have been enough at that time for me to said, I'm out. For some of you, it will be the same.
Oh, so were you a landlord once upon a time?
I was a landlord. I've been doing property since 1994.
And you've sold up?
I've sold up now.
All
Why?
of it?
Everything. I'm out. Why? And I'm not saying you should get out. When you are out and you are seen as the enemy by the councils, a particular property in Kingston they came to inspect. Everything on it was perfect, bar one thing that had happened that morning. For some reason, the handyman thought that the cold smoke seal on the kitchen door was a draft excluder. So he peeled it off and put it in the door frame. Did it affect the integrity of the door? No. As the gentleman who came to inspect said, you need to fix the FD30S, fire door 30-minute protection cold smoke seal, which is what FD30S says. What the council sent to me was interesting. I got an improvement notice, and it said, you must install an FD30S door set. Sorry? I need an FD30S door set?
It's just a strip that was missing, right?
Right. Well, I sent them the video that I took less than 15 minutes after the gentleman had left, where a new intermittent strip with cold smoke seal had been put on the door and a video of the door closing into the frame and being fully compliant. It was at that stage my colleagues in the office said, you panic so much about everything. You worry because you know your head is so far above the parapet, they are looking to guillotine it off for you. And you either got to get out of the business or you've got to
comply with it.
Just go and do that and stop working in this. And I had to make a decision, as some of you will have to do. I want to defend because I like to fight for rights more than I want to deal with tenants and tenants' problems and all of those things. And I know that the day my name appears in the tribunal determination, or the day I would get a fine for a housing offence, I'd be destroyed. I would feel like that gentleman who used to owe the jewellery chain saying the wrong thing. It would be, where's the faith? Where's our business? And what I do, I don't do it for the money. I do it because somebody has to fight. More and more people are coming on with it. More and more people are beginning to realise the landlord can win. The landlord will win, and they need to have a good team around them. And I'm seeing more and more people coming together with that. And yes, I would love to own a portfolio in that way. My way now of investing is in a different way, where my name is not attached to anything and my name is not there. You've got to think more like David Beckham, because you're never going to see him getting a rent repayment order, but I'm sure he owns plenty of property.
But his business does, probably.
Yeah, his business does. And currently, most people who are watching this will have a limited company, and they will think, well, I've got a limited company, I am safe. I'm sorry to say you're not. If you're in control of the decisions in that limited company, the council will use something called Section 251 of the Housing Act, and they will go after the company and the director. Now, I'm pleased to say one of the London boroughs recently, last year now, they were doing it, going after every single person they could, landlord, the subletter, if there was a subletter involved, the limited company, and everybody involved. So for the one offence, they could get multiples, but there is now case law that is stopping them trying to get 5 or 6 different people who might be involved, including when I say people, meaning companies, for a management regulations offence. Only one person can be held responsible generally for managing it, and if that's a company or an individual. So the law, the more we fight, the more we make case law, the more we stop the mockery and the ambiguity that's out there. But we have to remember the housing police is called the local housing authority.
So I know it sounds like all quite depressing, to be honest, but
It's not.
I think what we need to look at is where we are where we are. I think the things where I take from this is how do we get more peers? You were going back to the Magna Carta policy or the rule that we should be tested against by our peers. How do we, as landlords or people like you in the business, get more landlords into these tribunals, into landlord activists, and everyone's there siding the tenants. And yes, the numbers are obviously inside of the tenants, where there's 2.5 million landlords, something like that.
2.4.
2.4 million landlords, and probably I don't know how many millions of tenants there are. 10, 12 million.
More than that, many more than that.
Let's say 4 times the amount of landlords. So there is obviously this, but let's look at it from a landlord's perspective and say, okay, what are the 3 things that landlords must do in 2025 right now to A, prepare for the Renters' Rights Bill, and B, kind of try and, as you said, protect themselves from all of this ongoing compliance. And it really is a minefield. So I know people could come to you, obviously, when or if, God forbid, they get a planning enforcement. But more importantly, what should they do to protect themselves?
Before I answer those 3 questions, I think we're talking about coming together as a collective.
Yes.
We have to bring all the landlord organisations need to come together as a group that's Landlords for Justice.
Right.
And we want to fight for justice. And we need to come together regardless of who leads it, whose name's in the front, whose name's in the frame. It's about being a body. When you look at how things happen, how we see protests in London about certain things, and hundreds of thousands of people come, we never see hundreds of thousands of landlords. We don't even see, I think the largest landlord association has got 110,000 members.
NRLA.
Yeah. And on the basis they've got 110,000 members, it's a great, I believe the CEO is very good at lobbying and in Parliament all the time. But if he had 10 times the amount of people gathered together with him, fighting together with all of them, and we are talking to many people. Next week, I'm actually going to a West Yorkshire Council's steering committee meeting on their selective licensing, because their last licensing scheme failed.
Right.
And we're going there to go to the steering committee meeting. They have requested that we be able to present because they have failed. They have failed ridiculously in an area where they're supposed to get rid of antisocial behaviour, but they had riots there last year. Okay, This is how good they are. The councils, they've got too much to do, not enough money, not enough resources, and the way they do it is they are the worst housing providers. They've got more offences than anybody else. They are absolutely hypocritical. And in any other country where the CEO was running an organisation where on one side of it he's doing something that is wrong, and on the other side he's taking money from other people who are failing for the same reasons, called civil penalties and improvement notices that are necessary half the time, that would be called corruption. But in England, we don't like that word because we're too posh for that.
Yeah.
We've got a king, we've got an empire, we've got all that. We have got more corruption in this country than some of the countries we like to criticise.
Yeah.
At least in a country, I hate to say, in some countries, at least when the places are being run by the criminals, you know who's in charge. Here, we don't know half the time who's in charge, who's going to catch us. But councils are going door-to-door knocking and checking things. So the 3 tips are really simple.
Yeah.
Really, really simple.
Let's go for
Number 1, be compliant. Now, that sounds easy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Be compliant means you need to read the legislation. You can look on On the legislation website, if you can understand it, you can find people like me, go look people like me up on social media. If you put Des Taylor Landlords into Google or into Facebook or YouTube, you will get a lot of information about the things that I deal with on a regular basis. I literally talk about those and pick my phone up and do a video, or I dictate something and I give it to somebody and we put that out on there for everybody's help. So
But
you
the
can
thing
start.
is, this is a great tip. And you go on your council website and you look at what the licensing rules are in your council. And then you go along and see which ones are applicable to your property, whether it's a buy to let, it's HMO, service accommodation, all of it, right? So that's the first thing.
Yeah.
Comply.
Right, be compliant. And how do you, the next point there, as you said, is make sure you are on the updates that are coming from the council. But I would be putting in my calendar every first Monday of the month or every first Tuesday, whichever day suits you, go to the council website and search and go on the AI and go on the, AI may not be accurate, but go on the websites, go on Google and all the types and go and check regularly every month for any changes, because you are it's strict liability. So not knowing and something happening, so being compliant is the number one thing. The second thing is, and this I cannot shout loud enough. Shall I shout? No, I won't. I'll just be good because we're in a little room, but I can't shout loud enough. Stay silent with the council. Okay. Right. And I will say this because I learned this from I happened to be taking a trip from in the United States on a small plane from Chicago to a place called Fulton. And when I took that plane, it was a 10-seater plane. It was like on a private jet. And I happened to sit next to a guy who was an American. And when he heard my voice that sounds like I grew up in London, he said, "You from London?" And I said, "Yeah." And he started talking. And he turned out that he was an American who'd lived in Hereford. For those of you who might be old enough, might know that Hereford was a very, very secret place that the United States government had Secret Service and various other people placed. And we got talking, and like you'll probably ask me at the end of this, what is one piece of advice you would give to somebody? I said to him at the end of our conversation as we were getting off the plane, I said, "So what's one piece of advice you'd give to somebody like me with your experience in life?" And these were his simple words that I will never, ever forget. If a policeman, he said man, it could be a police person. He said, if a policeman knocks on your door and you did not call them, they are not there for your benefit. Don't open the door. Now, I will say exactly the same with the council. If you get a call, "Hello, I'm just calling from Slough Borough Council or Leeds City Council," I don't know who you are, but we know from cybercrime that people phone people and say things and do things. If you are who you say you are and I'm who you're looking for, you'll know how to put it in writing to me. I'm terminating the call. And put the phone down at that point. Do not get into any conversation. Now, you might start worrying and go, "Oh, but I'm in trouble, I'm in trouble." You're going to find out soon enough, right? Because the reason they're calling you is they've already had a complaint. They're calling you because your tenant's already done something. If it were me, the first thing I would be doing is going and inspecting my property, giving 24 hours notice. Yeah? You know if you've got a problem house most of the time.
Yeah.
The big thing that sometimes is you've had a fire. Well, if they call, it'll be the police. And when the police call you, you know it's the police. They have a way of making sure you know it's the police and not mucking around. So if there's a fire at your property, the police, the fire brigade and the council will all turn up. That is probably the most common way for people to find out that they're going to be enforced against. And it may not be a fire in your own property. Many times there's been a fire, and what happens is the council go down the streets and knock on doors and check everybody's okay. And check nobody's got any smoke inhalation problems or things like that. So a number of cases that have happened like that. Got one planning case where the fire brigade, where'd all these people come from? And somebody had built a block of flats above a shop. Nobody knew it was there. No planning, all those things. So you get enforced for those things. So really, really important. Stay silent with the council because they're not calling you for your benefit. Find out what's going on. Get everything in writing. And at that moment, then seek professional help. I did a case yesterday. It was a rent repayment order. Unfortunately, the lady, for whatever reason, came to us in the beginning of the year. She'd got a rent repayment order. She brought her case to us. We told her she would need to engage us. There would be a cost to that, but we would handle it. And if she was innocent, we would get her off. And if she wasn't, we would handle the situation. Eventually, she presented the bundle of information came to the tenants. They presented their bundle to the tribunal. There was a response to that bundle. And when I read it, it wasn't good reading. But what she'd inadvertently done was told so much information that she incriminated herself, and at the same time, she'd given information that was irrelevant and unnecessary, thinking it would help. And the other thing was she'd involved her tenants in communications that she shouldn't have. So in the end, it took hours and hours and hours of time to show her why she wasn't going to win and why she needed to come to an agreement. And that actually resulted in us having to go to the tribunal room before the stark reality of you're going to stand in front of a judge and say what you're going to say, and the other side there and having the conversation. And the other side said to me exactly what I could see. You don't have a case because you didn't actually make the application. You think you made the application and the website was down. So really, the third thing is...
So how much did they pay for the rent repayment?
I can't tell you that because it's a confidential matter.
Sure.
But if I go back 3 months before... on Valentine's Day, it wasn't a Valentine's Day massacre, but it felt like it was. The tenants in that one, the landlord had good records. He had records of his application. He had a copy of the application. He had emails confirming. He had bank statements showing the payment. He had confirmation emails of all of that. The council didn't have any of that, and neither did the tenant. So we were able to prove beyond reasonable doubt that the landlord had done everything and he had a fully legal defence.
So he won.
He won. He was absolutely over the moon. But I will say this now. He had to spend an awful lot more money for me to attend as an advocate for him on the day, but he had gone through the process of not getting advice at the beginning. And so if he'd got the advice at the beginning, I would have wiped that out probably very early. His costs would have gone down. Now, he's a wise person and he's going to sue the tenants for his costs. He's not going to go through the tribunal process because they probably won't be awarded. But they made, quite frankly, a vexatious application. They had no evidence. And you need to be very aware. Lots of councils don't have the paperwork they claim to have.
Yeah.
And you need someone like me who will go and find that and check that out. Because I'm not going to say that people lie, but the council doesn't have to prove its evidence until you go to appeal.
Yeah.
And most people are going, oh, I'm just going to surrender. And that's not the thing to do.
So going back to the 3 points, be compliant, do not take the call unless you have to, or politely disconnect.
And seek professional advice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, there aren't many companies that do what we do. I don't think there's any firm of solicitors that does what we do. The difference between our firm and other people is that we have good legal advice. We have good operational people. We have good practical advice. We have all been landlords. We actually understand what we're doing. We understand something that I haven't been able to find many people understand, which is the operational application of the law. And that is what the law is written for. And that's why we generally win so many.
So going back to the Renters' Rights Bill, then, of course, you've got these rent repayment orders. You've got the right for councils to walk into your house at any point, apparently, given point in time, which is quite a new...
No, it's not.
Okay, well, can they just walk in any time to any of your houses right now?
Right, so everything that's in the Renters' Rights Bill that everybody keeps telling me is new, the right to enter the property is already there. Section 239 of the Housing Act 2004 says that they can serve notice and give 24 hours notice
To
the tenant
Enter the
and the
house.
landlord, but they can go knock on the door as they do and enter. If the tenant lets them in, they're in. They don't have to tell the landlord. I've had a number of cases where the council has said, we issued a Section 239 notice of entry. We didn't send it to the landlord because our own belief, wherever that came from, was that in sending it to the landlord and giving him the opportunity to be present, he would interfere.
But they're not legally obliged to do this.
So they don't have to even tell the landlord. And many landlords think it's wrong. And many of them protest the council about it. When you start protesting about something that you're wrong about, they know, well, he doesn't know that bit. What else don't they know? And they'll know they're going to win against you. They can go in now already. They can also get a Section 240 warrant. So they can go to the judge in the magistrate's court and get a warrant to enter. And that can be on the suspicion that you haven't got a license. On the suspicion. They don't even know who's in the property. And then the other part is, and the bit that people don't like to hear, the next stage of the legislation says Section 241, it's an offence to obstruct an officer of the council in their duty under the Housing Act. So you can't stop them going in, even if they're going in. To obstruct them, even if they're not doing it properly, is an offence. So like we see so many crimes, you are doing the right thing, they might be doing the wrong thing, but you end up getting in front of the judge. And I don't want people to be there in front of judges. They're not fair.
Sure. And then what else do you think the Renters' Rights Bill is going to be really, really worrying for landlords, apart from all of this stuff that we've just talked about?
The most worrying thing is that most people are running a business, selecting tenants without any understanding of the full process of what they need to do. And they don't understand what the words prescribed information mean, although that's been around since 2015. So that's 10 years. It's not a new thing. They don't. So some don't do protect deposits. Some don't do referencing. Some don't do affordability checks. All of those things are going to be a requirement because now they've got a right of indefinite tenure, essentially.
Yeah.
And because they've got a right of indefinite tenure, the tenant needs to be selected who's not going to give you any trouble, because trying to get them out will be more difficult. So if I was going to spend my time on selecting my tenant, I would probably go through the same process that I would do if I was thinking about choosing someone for the rest of my life. I think I'd write down everything that's really important to a tenant in the future. Now, how do you do that? Most people don't know. I know the simplest way is look at every tenancy you've ever had and every niggly little thing that went wrong, write those down and then just do the opposite.
Yeah.
So I need a tenant who appears to have a bank account that shows they live a life where they can manage their money. So you ask their 3 months bank statements.
Yeah.
If every day they're spent in Pizza Hut, Weatherspoons,
Costa
taking
Coffee.
Ubers and all of that sort of thing, and they're overdrawn, where are they transferring their money to? Are they getting money in from a trustee as a beneficiary? From a trust as a beneficiary? Where did they get the address for you from?
Analyze the bank
Analyze
account
everything.
diligently.
Bank account, you analyze what they do, look at their social media, know everything. Now, people say that's discriminatory. No, it's not.
No, it's not discriminatory.
It's called due diligence.
Absolutely.
I'm only going to give an empty room with no income is so much better than an occupied room with no income, because an occupied room with no income will be a problem in the future
So
to
they're
get an
costing you
income.
money.
But an empty room, you can always turn it into income. So I would say and suggest that every single tenancy you initiate, you have got a set of rules and you band them 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 of things that are important and have a score that you will work with. So let's say I did some work for a landlord recently and we had to select a HMO management agency for them in a particular part of the northern home counties. There was a 50-step process we went through to select them. And one of the questions we asked them was, what does the Deregulation Act 2015 mean? And the responses we were getting from people were, well, I'm qualified and I did the NRLA training. Okay. I've done the ALA training, Property Mark 3.
The agency saying that.
And I'm like, that's not the answer to the question. And when you're a landlord, when you're asking tenants questions, do not let them answer the question they want to answer that you haven't asked them. And I give an example of this. We've all been there. We've been in a pub. We're with a bunch of people. And we say to somebody, would you like a drink? And the biggest answer we get is, no, I'm all right. That is the response to the question, how are you feeling? It's not the response to, do you want a drink? The response to, you want a drink, yes or no. What drink do you want? You would never say, I'm all right. Oh, you might do, but that's still an answer to a different question. And as human beings, we've come to accept that people will give us an answer that they want to give us rather than the answer we need. And the truth goes through 3 stages, I found, with tenants. The first one is what sounds good. The second one is what sounds even better. And then the third one generally gets to the truth. It's the same. For 16 years of doing recruiting, I had to find out why people were really leaving their job. And if they were leaving for money, we didn't help them. And you as a tenant, as a landlord that qualifying out a tenant, you have to be sure that that person who's moving in that property is going to look after that property the way you want them to. And some people go to the extent of going to the previous address, driving by, seeing what it's like, having a look going on Google Maps, looking at the
Social media is a
gardens.
big tell these
Yeah.
days, right? You
Yeah.
can tell what they've been up to and things like that. But I think if you have a managing agent, I mean, you're not expecting that letting agent to do any of this, right?
You are. Right. So this is the problem that with the Renters' Rights Act, you will need to manage the manager. And the managers, I would be going through demanding a level of service. And if they can't do it, change. Find that one that will. And any agency out there, and if your agent's listening, design your service so they cannot ignore you. Design your service. It's so good. Yes, you may cost an awful lot more money, but in comparison to the problems that come, as a HMO landlord, my tenant qualification process was so strict, I didn't get problems from tenants. Not problems that people I see all the time. And you didn't get a viewing. You didn't even enter the premises unless I knew exactly who you were. And I remember being at one particular premises. No, I wasn't at this particular one, but one of the staff was. And the woman said, "But I work for the council. I don't have to do any of this. You have to let me do the viewing." And I just said to the staff member, Richard, as I remember now, Richard, say to her, we don't have to let anybody into the house. We have to protect the tenants who are in the house today. And if we don't know the full identity of the person who's entering the house, and you go off and 5 months later we find out that something was stolen, then we go to the police. They're going to say, well, who was in the house? Oh, we can't tell you. So all of those things, think about what can go wrong and what you need to provide, and then you'll get the answers to what you should do in the beginning.
I think those are really great tips. Vetting is an absolutely amazing one. Due diligence on the accounts, I think, is, analyzing the bank statement is a really good one as well. From the landlord activism point of view, I think we don't have a fair representation in Parliament, in local councils and tribunals. And you, I think, kind of started to mention a little bit about what you guys are up to. So how can we, because obviously, I run an event, but I also run, part of a community I've been hosting for the best part of 9 years. How could we get involved? Because obviously we do have access to a lot of landlords, not only in our community, but also some of the local ones that we're part of. How can we get involved?
So in the West Yorkshire community, there's somebody who is very active in dealing with councils, and she's doing a very good job, and I'm helping her along the way. But I probably wouldn't do everything the way she's done it, but she's gone really so far forward that the council actually asked for one of my presentations if it could be used in their consultation. Of course, because it was about a licensing consultation and it was my intellectual property, I did say to them I could license it to them. Interestingly, they don't like paying license fees. So I didn't license the content to them. They were going to refer that it had happened, the meeting had happened. That's why I'm going to the meeting next week. But the key thing here is we need to lobby. We need to lobby more. I'm ready, but I'm not in a position to run an organisation, but I'm ready to work with people who want to come together. We've already, some years ago, formed an organisation, and we've been waiting for something to happen where people would come together. So we'll be looking for campaign managers, we'll be looking for lobbyists, we'll be looking for a CEO, we'll be looking for people. It would all be on a voluntary basis, I'm sorry to say. It's not something I can fund.
Look,
but we want to put this company together. It's called Landlords for Justice.
Okay.
Okay.
But look, count me in.
Yeah.
Whether you want me as a campaign manager, CEO,
but
whatever it is.
we need to start that now.
100%.
And we need to get somebody on board to take that on board. We will have to pay some salaries to some people, so we're going to need to do fundraising.
Yeah.
It's going to need to be a contribution business. Now, I'd love to do it, but then who's going to do what I'm doing right now? So I've got to bring in people.
To run.
So you might remember Patricio talked about a book called Who Not How. I'm not going to do the how, I'm going to do the who. So we've got to find the who's on that. And what I would like to do at some stage, because we all know a lot of people, is at an opportunity that we can probably do in the summer, we get a bunch of people together, we'll sit wherever, a pub garden if it need be, probably in Mount easier to get people more relaxed. We'll sit down, work out and scribe out what's got to happen, begin to make it and work through and make a plan so that we can become those. And we'll bring in the NRLA, we'll bring in iHouse, we'll bring in the Yorkshire Landlords Association, bring all of those associations together. What's really interesting, and I say this because I have to be careful what I say, Sometimes when I'm at the tribunal, I meet people who I know who work in the councils who are on the panels. And there are some people that I've come to get to know in their job at the council who really like the fact that we want to change things and that we're fair and reasonable. And I've got a lot of them. There are people in councils who actually want to become whistleblowers who could eventually get into our campaign. Because the councils, if you think landlords are bad, what's going on in the councils is atrocious in some of them, and what's happening is atrocious. But what we want to do is we want the guy at the tribunal. I got talking to him yesterday, between things, and he wasn't on a case. So I have to be really clear. You're not allowed to talk to these people unless you go through the clerk. It was completely separate. And I said to him, what I want to do is I want to get a bunch of councils together with a bunch of landlords that we brought together, like Landlords for Justice, and we want to explain why your amenity standards don't work, why they're not going to work for the future, and how what we need to do is say there is a rule in the future and your amenity standards can come in the future. But putting them in and then retrospectively applying them to something that's already been licensed, it's not particularly going to work. Who's creating the homelessness when you take a HMO room out of use? The council.
And to be honest, a lot of the landlords they've had to fine thousands and thousands of pounds is generally the social landlords. So if you look at the actual numbers, social landlords have probably been fined a lot more than the private landlords. And, I mean, I don't know the exact numbers, but I'm sure you've seen that before.
There's lots of
Large
people.
housing associations for neglecting AWAB, that was in a social housing sector, not in the private sector. So private landlords are being criminalized for the misdoings of, I would say, social landlords. And I think Landlords for Justice is a great idea. But is it too late for Renters' Rights Bill, or is it too late to what can it have the power to do? Is it just lobbying? And
The Renters' Rights Bill was the Renters' Reform Bill beforehand. Everything that happened there, we went to the Department of Levelling Up, as it was at the time, and we told them all the consequences and everything. And like most things in government, thank you. Yes. Oh, very nice. That's pleasing. Oh, thank you for your help. Thank you for your contribution. And I would say, if you've ever experienced the TV program series Yes Minister, it's exactly like that. It's all nonsense. It's all whatever. And basically everybody's covering everybody else's back. Nobody really cares about the people. Nobody really cares about the situation. So I wouldn't spend any time on it. My advice here is that we do need to do it. We need to get on with it. If people are now ready, because I think they are, they weren't ready 8 years ago when we had the idea. They weren't ready when I think we formed the company 6 years ago. It's just sitting there. But we want to move forward with it. We want to take it to a point where it becomes better than shelter, better than crisis, better than generation rent. But we're going to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And at the same time, use it to expose the corrupt practices, the naughtiness. It would be business suicide for me to do that. But with an organisation that's independent, and I'm not, I don't want to run that business. To be quite frank, I want to be active in it. I want to help and advise. I really do want that to start. And if we're ready, then let's get started. Let's start getting people together. There are plenty of people, and I am going to say this now, and I mean this in the nicest possible way. If you're living in Dubai and you want to be part of this, you're probably not the right person. It's not anything against Dubai, but we don't really need the critics like going, oh yeah, I don't agree with London traffic, but I live in an island in the Caribbean.
well, look, let's not go there. The D word's banned in Titans.
No.
But look, I think I'm up for it. Count me in whatever role you think see me fit, or I can apply for one of those campaigner lobbyist roles. And we've got access to a huge community who are very passionate landlords. We're not just evil, land grabbing, greedy landlords. We are genuine professional landlords who are all educated. We've spent tens of thousands of pounds educating ourselves over the last 15, 20 years and what have you. And we continue to do so. There is a small minority of landlords who are still living in the old school way, thinking you can get away with not licensing or whatever, but we don't want to be unfairly, sort of justified against to say that, oh, you can, you'll get away with, £10,000 of fines and rent repayment orders. I mean, for God's sake, we've got mortgages to pay, right? And we have businesses to run. We might not be working people, according to the government, but we certainly are doing our fair share of work to keep the private sector housed and, I think living in good quality accommodation. And I'm very, very passionate about this. So definitely count me in. Really looking forward and excited about this new Landlord for Justice organization. But thank you so much for all the things that you've shared with us today and, telling us the genuine stuff that goes on in the back end. And let's just get this sorted. Let's get landlords out there, fighting and shouting for our rights, screaming and shouting for our rights. Why not?
Well, I would say we've got the greatest opportunity we've ever had as landlords. As landlords leave the sector, opportunity. It's the best time to buy properties. It's the best time to invest in properties. Over time, buy and hold and manage well. You will make money. If you're in for the short term, quick money, probably there are other things to do. And currently, if you're going to do that, there are probably some very good stocks and shares you can buy, which you can probably get rid of more easily than a house.
Absolutely. I think you need to be in because you're passionate about it, you genuinely believe in it, and you have to corporatize your business. That's the only way going forward. Thank you, Des, for your time. I really hope you guys found it useful, and definitely reach out to us, and we'll be posting you details of the London for Justice campaign. Thank you, Des.
Thank you.
Please support, like, and follow me if you want to be in touch with all the property news in 2025 and beyond. Thank you.